Hello and welcome back to the Security Metrics Podcast. My name is Jen Stone. I'm one of the principal security analysts here at Security Metrics. Very excited about our topic today because privacy online, especially as parents teaching our children about it, is a very important topic. And sometimes we're not quite sure how to approach it. But I have a father-daughter pair to guide us through it. Will you please introduce yourselves?
Absolutely. I'll go first. My name is Sean Atkinson. I am CISO at the Center for Internet Security. Been in the industry now, goodness, Jen, it's over 20 years. That went by fast.
I mean,
Um,
it does, doesn't it?
oh, it certainly does. It certainly does. A blink of an eye. And yeah, so I've been in the industry, 20 years, and we were, as we go into and we'll talk about the guide, but it was really Emma who was the inspiration for the guide. So let me turn over to Emma.
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm 15 and I'm a sophomore at Emma Willard School.
Well, welcome
Wonderful.
both of you. Very excited to have you.
Thank you very much.
And people who maybe are not familiar with CIS, it's a big deal. You should go check it out. Center for Internet Security. As an assessor, I'm very familiar with it. We use your products and services that you have out there for people all the time. It's
Wonderful.
basically the gold standard for
We like
internet
to
security.
think so. We
Yeah,
like to think so, Jen.
absolutely.
Yeah, as a nonprofit, we're really trying to establish that confidence in the connected world. That's basically the mission that we go by, and the CI's controls, the benchmarks, and all that we do in that space. We want to see as contributive, right, as an element to improve security.
Absolutely.
And this, as we thought about the guide, Jen, and like you mentioned, about privacy and having these conversations, it's another one of those elements, right? This is a little bit of a different take, as it were. But hopefully, there's as we get into it, there's you'll see the value.
Yes. And so this guide, I wrote it down from both sides, a parental guide to protecting your child's online activity. So you mentioned that it was because of Emma. Emma prompted the start of the guide. What gave you the idea? What gave you the idea to do it together? I'd love to hear
Yeah.
more about that.
No, absolutely. I'll jump in and then I'll have Emma give her perspective as well. But it was one day we were talking about, she was asking permission to download an app,
Hmm.
and it was a social media app. And I said, no, there's some intelligence out there. And, me being a CISO
Yeah.
that I'm aware of, I said that's probably not going to be the best one. And so we started having a conversation about why. And I thought that that was reasonable to answer that question, not just a no. It was
Yeah.
about opening communication and trying to educate. And this is where, the guide came in. And so we had this one conversation. And then the thought was, well, I bet other parents are having this conversation. And I bet that maybe they're not in positions like I am or aware of certain information. And we then started strategizing, and we built out 10 scenarios, and then it became 20. Um, and yeah, then ultimately we just started writing. We finished this summer on summer vacation.
Mhm.
But anyway, why is from both sides? I think that was an important question.
Yeah, from both sides is definitely important because it was important to me that he didn't just say no and elaborated on why it was a no. And I felt like it was important that other kids knew why it's important to stay safe online.
Oh, so not just um, why you're getting told no, but why staying safe online is an important concept in general.
Yes, absolutely.
I have to agree with you. Just a personal aside, one of the things that I also do involves a, an aerial competition with children, and so explaining to the adults, the coaches, and the parents why they should maybe consider using a stage name, why they should protect how much of the information about their child they put out there when they're very excited about what the child's achieving. That's a difficult conversation, and finding the right balance is hard. So I
Absolutely.
think that your guide is going to maybe help guide that conversation a little bit.
Well, we hope so. I mean, ultimately, the guide is not supposed to be prescriptive in a lot of cases, right? That the way we had written it was there's different contexts on the type of communication that you'll have with children at different ages. So we've reflected that in some of the scenarios. So from both sides, and reflected in the guide is we have a scenario of a child in a certain situation, and then there's advice, and then there's parental advice, and then that helps, navigate these conversations. And it's, ones we've had. I'll just tell you, scenario 10 was the genesis of this. This was the social media app one. So it was, we interjected some of our conversations into it as well. And hopefully it brings to light just an approach. And I think it
Mhm.
is so much about communication. But, one of the things, Jen, that we've done, and reflectively, this is between me and Emma over time, is at different ages, there's different conversations,
Mhm.
right? As from younger when they first get a device, and you kind of when you see 10 or younger getting devices, and it's okay, what controls are in play? Oh, none, just provided the device, and away we go. And then it's there's certain dangers in that space. There's a responsibility, Jen,
Right.
in that area.
Absolutely. So the guide lists 20 topics,
Yeah,
and it is accompanied, like you said, by example scenarios, advice to the child, potential consequences of the scenario if the advice isn't followed, and advice to parents. So, how did you decide on this approach to talking about online security?
well, go ahead. Why did we structure it that way?
Well, we structured it that way so people had a reference point of where, like, conversation starters with their child to see how to navigate difficult conversations about cybersecurity.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, we did it that way, Jen. To Emma's point, because there's certain topics that are tricky, right? The inappropriate content one is a huge one,
that is a
and
hard one for
very,
parents
very
and for
difficult.
kids. And then you get it
Yeah,
together and
yeah,
have this very uncomfortable conversation.
yeah.
It's nice to have a guide about it.
It's nice to have the guidance, and I think it's also nice that the way we try to present it is that it's in a lot of cases a shared experience, because in some cases, Jen, the phone is kind of this watershed moment. It's one of the things I reflect is it's kind of like the discussion, sorry, on the birds and the bees in a lot of
Mhm.
cases, because
Yeah,
ultimately, unfettered access to the internet is has consequences, and we need to one educate the parents at the same time as we're also educating children.
right. So I'd like to share a few of the topics that you cover so that
Please,
listeners can kind of get a feel for the and information that we're talking about. And I want to start with the first topic, dangers of sharing personal information online. Why did you feel it was important for this one to be number one?
We felt like it was important for that one to be the first one because it's almost like you'd think it was almost obvious. Like I hear some people say like, "Oh, I'd never give my information out on the internet," but there's social engineering tactics that people can use that definitely gain your trust and make you give that information away without you necessarily knowing that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I,
Hugely important. I mean, that's one of the fears in a lot of cases, Jen, right? That there's who is behind the other screen.
right.
And it's a very, very tricky landscape. And it was one of the awareness elements that I first started talking to Emma about, and why we said, look, if we're going to say anything, just one thing out of this is the immediate need that we want to see, because ultimately it's about protection, and it's
Definitely.
about awareness. And the tactics that you mentioned, and we went over this, Jen and I, was it's you don't want to go into too much of the fiction, right? That, like, we're going through scenarios in movies and things of that nature, but it's not far away from the fact that there are persons that over time will gain that trust. And a little
Hmm.
bit of information I give here, oh, I didn't give all of my information, I just told them the town I lived in.
Yeah.
And then the 3 or 4 conversations, well, then I told them the street or where I'm near in terms of a geographic location. And that's built up over time, and that's the techniques that, we referenced,
Right.
as part of what we had discussed.
A-
Yeah.
Emma, I'm glad that you mentioned phishing because some of these phishing techniques people use, and I'm sure you've seen it, are
Mhm.
so um, you don't even realize somebody's trying to get you to give them something. Like, the this or that quizzes where there's a list on one side of a preference and a list on another, like cats versus dogs, and they go through and circle them, right?
Mhm.
Well, you can get a lot of information about a person from that. You know, it, and the more that they do, the more you can find out what their dog's name is and their mother's maiden name and what is their favorite color and all of these kind of security questions that we use to protect
Yes.
things. And you think you're just
Yeah.
fooling around with your friends.
Right.
Mhm.
So one of the areas that we also mentioned, Jen, that I think is important in that space is, you know, sometimes there's enticements to fill out those quizzes and give that type of information. And it ultimately is said, if it's too good to be true, let's start thinking a little bit abstractly and
Yeah.
trying to think in that way. But that's honestly, Jen, that's quite mature thinking.
Yeah.
And, when you're putting 8, 9, 10 year olds with that type of device and trying to make those types of decisions, again, Emma's 15. I have no idea how that happened. I mean, it's just gone by in a flash, right? You want them to remain kids forever. But, the adage of children are maturing way faster than we ever
Yeah.
were with this type of technology is, I think in some kind, obviously I'm a technologist. I love the technology, but it's a shame that innocence necessarily can be lost if we're not utilizing the technology judiciously and
Yeah.
then also providing necessarily oversight and assistance in these spaces.
So let's look at some of the advice that you actually give to parents, starting
Sure.
sticking with that first topic. Scenario is written in a way that both parents and children can understand and recognize what's happening there, and then you cover some of the advice that you give. Maybe dive into that a little bit for us.
Sure. Yeah. From the parent piece, it's, it kind of seems simple, but we wanted to outline it. This open dialogue. I think it's so important that children feel like they can bring certain situations and certain issues to bear, as it were. And in some cases, right, there's, we've seen with friends and others that there's kind of a closing off, that there's an embarrassment element. There's
Yeah.
I think I did something wrong. I'm going to see if it just goes away and I'm not going to say anything. And it's trying to create that open dialogue. And one of the elements, obviously, is educating on risks. It's going through these scenarios. What are the consequences? Jen, when we share this information and, some of the other scenarios that we've put in here, and one of the things we've warned about is this has a consequence not just today, but in the future, right? That the internet has persistence
Yeah.
and we've got to be very, very careful about what we're doing. And we hit some of those elements as well, just to look at what we should be doing with this responsibility, right? And I do feel that it's on both sides. That's why literally it's named from both sides. Is that there's all accountability across the board, right? Just the unboxing and unsealing and charging of a device and handing it off literally starts us on a journey of these advice. So the online interactions. What can we do to supervise in that space? The other thing I realized, Jen, as writing this through, and we've jokingly talked about that Emma's going to write a guide to help grandparents because she has technical expertise to help my parents, my wife's parents in
Hmm.
this space, and I think there's something in that too that we could go down that path.
I would
But
love to see a
yeah,
guide for grandparents because the targeting of our older population in some of these phishing traps, they
oh,
don't that's not the world they came from. They don't
no,
expect that there's people out there that are maliciously going to try and gets their last dime from them.
absolutely. I mean, you see it all the time, and it's so unfortunate because in a lot of cases, it's done from such a good place that they're trying to, they get your child or someone from Facebook. So I'll grab your Facebook profile. This person needs money. They're in a foreign country. They're traveling. You need to wire them money,
Hmm.
and they don't verify. They react, right, because this is
Yeah.
an emergency,
Yeah.
and it's so hard to see that this continues. And the problem is, Jen, without the education, it's going to continue because it's profitable from that perspective, right? From the attacker, from this mindset, and it's where we thought there's a case to be made in that area to provide grandparents and senior citizens access to information like this and guidance.
Right. The next topic, I have a question that's more for Emma. Um, because it talks about restricting access online, and I just wanted to ask you, do you have restrictions in your online access? Was that kind of how did that feel to be told you are not permitted to access certain things?
Well, I guess I have to sort of think of it as less of a punishment and more of like we're trying to keep you safe sort of a thing. And like I do have like a private accounts on all the social media I have, and I just come from a perspective like trying to understand that it's less of a punishment.
Yeah, I can see how if you get these things restricted without the conversation, it would completely feel like you were being punished. It would completely feel like nobody understands you and wants to listen to you. And um, I was 15 a very long time ago, but I still remember how it felt when I got told no, when I felt like I could make my own decisions. How do these how do you think your father was able to create the right feeling between the two of you that he could have these conversations?
Well, he definitely like as a cybersecurity professional, like definitely had a conversation with me and was definitely open to me like bringing a point to him of like why maybe I shouldn't have those restrictions. But he definitely like reasoned with me and we came to a conclusion about it.
I think that is going to be really critical for a lot of parents is being willing to listen and be patient and hear your side on things.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Sean, from your perspective, some of these were adult topics that you had to have with your
Hmm.
child.
Yeah.
How how do you start down that path of dealing with some really uncomfortable and unsavory topics in order to protect your child?
Yeah, one of the things in that is a technique that I had used, and we go through it in terms of some of the parental advice, is scenario analysis is what I really call it, but it's laying out a story in a lot of cases. And, we can see and why, in the scenarios we've used different names representatively in order in different ages, because I do think there is certain requirements at certain ages where we, try to reveal information such as what we're describing here. Some of the harder ones, though, Jen, was honestly just being frank, just being open, sitting down. I just want to have a conversation with you about these things. You know, these are some of the elements that we see online. There are persons that will look to befriend you and they will look to get your information and potentially they would want to meet you in person. And their intentions, while it may seem very good, are to for their benefit only, and it's a detriment to you. It's really a risk to you, your well being and trying to, gently go through that path. This is not just a no, and it's because someone's going to, kidnap you, right?
Right.
That's a little bit too rough, I feel. But again, that's contextual. That's a way I communicate with Emma. And again, this is why the guide's not prescriptive. It's more about the communication and the relationship that you have in the space with your child, the way you communicate. We have to contextualize it. Why we're not prescriptive in terms of the advice that we're giving is that it helps you structure an approach. And in some cases, we've seen elements in this space of where it may just be we're going to have a frank conversation, right? And again, I'll use this term, the scared straight, as it were, in terms of we need to cut this activity out because it leads to these consequences. Or it's more of, going through the scenario and exemplifying things that you see on TV as well. Now, ultimately, Jen, one of the things that I've also seen is, let's say we're watching the news and a news story comes up where there's, a threat to a child or we've seen, criminal activity in the space. Try and abstract that story and apply it to certain scenarios for protection in this case. That's going to help now create a narrative. And I really, try and stress this open communication because I want, one of my big things is I want questions. I don't want it to be, oh, okay, dad, thanks. And it's questioning to
Yeah.
understand, right? It's not just the, what I'll call the the shoulder shrug and walk away, and we've not really necessarily learned anything. And that's why it's a dialogue. It's not just dictation of these rules. Is that we want to get into an approach where we can have a frank conversation. And I think ultimately we have to also understand that in these scenarios, I think in a lot of cases, it's hard for the parents to hear as well, especially when we get into the cyberbullying piece. One, we want to protect our children, but two, if they're the antagonist, we're going to have some conversations about this, right? Because we may hear
Right.
this from school, we may hear this from other parents, and we've got to, follow the rules, as it were, of what I'll call good data citizenship, or digital citizenship. Sorry,
Yeah.
that allows us then to be, utilizing these tools. One, you want the creativity, right? I think back to when I was a child, Jen, a long time ago when I was 15 as well, is I can't imagine having this vast wealth of knowledge, creativity at my fingertips today. I say you kids are so lucky to have this. But with that, access comes this, again, this element of responsibility, and it
Yeah.
has to be seen from both sides.
I think in a lot of ways, some of us we didn't have the internet when I was a kid.
Yep.
I was 15 when we got our first computer. It was an Apple IIe, and it was the first one in our entire town. So, looking at the access to information that Emma, you and your peers have, it's so much vaster than what we had, and in some ways, we can't comprehend the some of the stressors on you as a result of that. And so I think listening and trying to comprehend what you're dealing with is it creates a two-way street on this conversation.
Oh, it certainly does, right? I mean, we have to have that conversation.
Mhm.
Talk about where we talked about not having fear, necessarily creating fear of devices, but responsibility.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely leaning away from, like, talking about it and, like, trying to have, like, scare tactics
Hmm.
almost and, like, saying, "Well, this situation can happen, but here's how to prevent it, and here's how to be responsible and trustworthy with a device."
Yeah, I like that approach because if you have knowledge about something, you can make better decisions.
Yes,
So, do
absolutely
you
right.
have a favorite topic in the guide? Something that each of you that you really enjoyed working out and figuring out how to explain to others?
Yeah, mine was number 10 because that was the originator. That really helped kind of set the tone, as it were, for what we were trying to do with the guide. And it was the first thing we talked about. And so 10 always has kind of a place because we took Emma and we changed the scenario to Ella. So we changed
Mhm.
the M's to L's, and so it was just kind of our
Tiny
thing that we had
changes.
with number 10. What was yours?
Yeah, I definitely have to say number 10 as well because I feel like I apply that most, in my, like, digital life, I guess. Like, the think before you post, like, definitely is a thing that I go through.
Yeah, that's something that adults I think would benefit from more as well.
Mhm.
Absolutely right.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely right.
Taking
Yeah,
taking a
take that
breath
email
and
back.
eh, take a
I wish I
breath,
could.
think about it. Okay, so I think we've talked about why you create it and then how to approach the difficult topics. Are there any last pieces of advice that you would like to offer in along these lines?
Yeah, for me, is that okay if I go
Yeah,
first?
sure.
Yeah, wonderful. So one of the things for me is 14 hits home because that's one of the what I'm going to call, Jen, that one of the nightmare scenarios, one of the things that scares me, and that's the risk of meeting
Yeah,
strangers online. Kind of putting that out there as, and again, just for parents, as you're reading through, some of the scenarios, there's going to be things that hit home that are going to be, yeah, for my particular child, this particular context, my own fears and issues with, online utility generation, content management, things of that nature. it is these are going to be some important elements. It also was one of the things we had also discussed was the this is going to be 15, and so that's rules on the online gaming and chat room, because I think it's very difficult, Jen, for a child, and this is why we mentioned the scare tactics, because if a child's not going to be able to utilize or have fear of utilizing an electronic device, it's debilitating in this day and age, right? I mean, school, everything that's your kind of
Right.
your social life is all fixated around devices, and so we wanted to set those rules. But
Yeah,
your
and
thoughts?
adding to my dad's point, he said yesterday that the internet is written in ink rather than pencil. So, which I thought really
That's
was a
very
very,
I did.
insightful.
very
I did.
That's
I did
very
say that. I think I
insightful. What
stole
an
it from the
interesting
social
statement. Yeah.
network, but
Once it's there, it is there.
yes, it is.
Emma,
Yes, it is.
if you could give your peers, friends at school, whatever, a piece of advice, what would the number one topic be that you'd like them to know?
I definitely think speaking with strangers online is something that I've seen all too often, really. Which I think they should be mindful of that like they don't necessarily look like they have their avatar, or like they aren't necessarily who they claim to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's definitely something I need my people of my age to know.
That's a great comment. Well, this has been a really great conversation. I appreciate it. We'll make sure that we put links to the guide in the notes for the podcast, and I hope to talk to you again in the future.
Absolutely, Jen. Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for watching. To watch more episodes of Security Metrics Podcast, click on the box on the left. If you prefer to listen to this podcast, it's available on all your favorite podcast platforms. See you on the slopes.